believe we're live, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. We have a wonderful panel with us today. You all look great. Thank you for joining. We have participants coming in. We already have over 200 people joining this webinar. And without further ado, I want to thank everyone. We have over 800 people registered for this webinar despite contending with district and school openings. The interest in this webinar certainly provides a clear sign that discussing possibilities, learning about innovation, and identifying solutions are prioritized concepts in the field of education. So all participating in this webinar will not be disappointed. Today, we have educators and influencers who have boots on the ground to address education and the need for breakthrough leadership in this new normal. And hopefully we will all be able to show the world how education done well under pressure is done here in our country, and by using current research and by having conversations with each other that push innovation and thinking. Today, we have with us folks who will be talking about family and community engagement, organizational trust, the power of partnership, budgetary issues, and more. We have with us today Dr. Alan Blankstein and Dr. Marcus Newsome, the two authors, co-authors of Breakthrough Leadership, published by Corwin. And we have with us the incomparable Dr. Pedro Noguera, straight, I think, from his new office in California, right? Dr. Aaron Spence, hello. Thanks for joining us. Dr. John Malloy, directly from California, by way of Canada, right? And Dr. Paul Ravel, he's here with us. Yes, up there in the corner for me. And Dr. Susan Infield. Hi, Susan. And Nicole Turner, Dr. Nicole Turner, there you are with all the logistical answers for everyone that anyone has to ask about technology. And then we have Sharon Walder. Hi, Sharon. Hey, I like that color. You're looking good.
Oh, thank you.
Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over, everyone, to Alan, who's going to just introduce Alan, and Marcus, who will introduce us to the agenda and tell us what we have in store. And then then Pedro will take it away and talk to us. If you did not know, Pedro Noguera, Dr. Noguera, wrote the foreword for Breakthrough Leadership, but I don't want to steal Alan and Marcus's thunder, so I'll let you do the intros. Alan?
There's enough thunder to go around. Thank you, Monica. We're looking for some calm waters, actually. For being here, everybody, and thank you to my colleague and longtime friend, Pedro Noguera, with whom I've written a few things, and to both write the foreword to this book and be here today to help its launch. You know, it began with Dr. Marcus Newsome and I on capturing what to do in crisis. I mean, he was in a crisis situation as an award-winning superintendent after having been in various other situations. And we started to document what happens when the economy falls apart, when there are minimal supports, when you have an almost forgotten population for decades of schools that are never accredited. And in the middle of working on that piece, COVID struck. And shortly after that, civil unrest rose to the surface again. And we decided that we couldn't ignore what was really happening with everybody. So we reached out to many people, including many who are on this panel. And after talking with scores of other leaders, we realized that there are various levels of leadership. And managing the day-to-day is what many had done before. And what people rose to was adaptive leadership. They changed how they served food. They changed how they delivered the instruction. We all know all of these stories, and they're heroic in nature. And at the same time, there's yet another level of of dealing with these crises that we're hopeful that everyone will get to, or at least enough of us will get to move forward the whole agenda. And that is what we call breakthrough leadership. The fact is that we know now, and I'm sure that when we get back to whatever schooling is going to look like in the future, that seat time isn't the best way to average how students are doing. We know that food is important. It's critical for students to do well. We know all of these things, and we can adapt and change the kinds of practices that we had in the future. We know that families are essential. And we always knew it, but now we know that families are our extension of instruction. And so that too will hopefully move along with us as we come out of these crises. But what we also want to do is challenge people to do the kind of work that we are seeing as essential and at the root of the inequities that we're finding. We always knew there were inequities, and now we have the aha moment of walking into a home and seeing 6 children trying to share 1 laptop. We have the aha moments of not being able to find children because so many are homeless. And what do we do with this emotional resonance that people are having to the real equity crises that we've always had covered up, but now it's laid bare? So in today's program, we want to deal with both the adaptive situations, but we're saying that this is coming from out of the crisis to leading for real equity. And that's what we're focused on today. Marcus, I think, is going to take it from here around some of the learnings that we're going to be sharing out of today's discussion and the book as well.
Thank you, Alan. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. As previously said, we have an all-star panel here today, and I am so proud to be affiliated with so many talented thought leaders from across North America, and want to share a special appreciation to Alan for this great journey that we've enjoyed together, and the opportunity to really change lives in a way that we haven't seen in some time. So all of you are probably experiencing some of the same challenges, no matter what your work responsibilities are, that may come at you in different ways. This past week, a group of 18 superintendents from Southwest Virginia decided to write an open letter to the public, because we know that oftentimes, while we didn't create the challenges that we face right now, we are held responsible by our communities for solving the problems. And so this is an excerpt from several pages that they wrote. I'll be brief. School leaders across the Commonwealth have difficult and complicated decisions to make every day, including decisions regarding personnel and schedules and students and staff safety and transportation and special education and finances, just to name a few. On a typical day, these decisions are all encompassing, and now factor in the pandemic. Typically, we would ask questions like, how are we going to train our staff in this new Title IX regulations our state may face? Or do we have enough money in our budget to hire an additional guidance counselor or a health professional? When will we be renovating projects that were on the docket? But since the pandemic, should we order? How do we reach students who don't have reliable internet access? The teacher has to self-quarantine if their father that they last saw 10 days ago tested positive for COVID-19. So when Alan and I how they are dealing with a lot of these challenges, and now Corwin.
So Marcus, you're going in and out. and you're breaking up, and I think we may have lost him completely. So Nicole, Dr. Nicole, come on now with this internet stuff. We'll get to you. But since we lost Marcus, we're going to go right to Pedro, because Pedro is going to do the intro and talk about the foreword in the book. Dr. Noguera, hello.
Hello, Monica.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. It's a real pleasure to be part of this panel, although I'll only be here for the beginning. I do want to, first of all, commend Alan Blankstein and Marcus Newsome for an amazing book. I was so impressed that in such a short period of time, with the cooperation from Corwin, they were able to pull together and I think publish a book that is an important contribution to the field at a critical time. Let me just acknowledge the times we're in, first of all, because many of us, including many of us on this Zoom call, are under great stress. We're under stress because of the economic uncertainty caused by the pandemic. We're under stress because of the pandemic itself, which has killed over 200,000 people in this country, and which still is by no means fading away. We're under stress because of this coming election, which we don't know how it will end. And anybody who watched the debate last night just got a sense of how chaotic it's likely to be. And we're under stress because despite all this, we still have to lead our schools, and we still have to provide comfort to the children who are showing up, even if it's showing up on Zoom, but looking for reassurance during a time of so much uncertainty. So the timing of this book is critical because, as we know, leaders are often expected to work under constraints, even during what we might call normal times. Leaders in our schools are working with budgets that don't meet all the needs. They're trying to address challenges facing their communities and their children, often without adequate resources and personnel. And they're trying to make a difference. And making a difference requires vision, it requires resourcefulness, it requires the kind of breakthrough leadership that's described in the pages of this book. And so for the leaders who are out there, who are looking for guidance, who are looking for a source of inspiration during these troubled times, I think you're going to find it in the pages of this book. I want to say that on top of the constraints that we face, what we know is that when leaders are resourceful, when they're able to connect with their community, and I think most importantly with the families they serve, their ability to make a difference goes up considerably. All of us know that parents and families always are critical to the education of any child. And if you have children of your own, know that if you're not involved, then chances are your children are not going to do as well. We also know from the research that when there's reinforcement at home for what's happening in school, kids do better. The challenge is, how do we build partnerships that are rooted in trust and respect and I would say empathy. And empathy in particular is critical right now because we know that many families are struggling. As Alan pointed out, many families are working under suboptimal conditions to support their kids. Parents are working while the kids are trying to do Zoom. Imagine trying to work while your 5- and 6-year-olds are trying to Zoom lessons. It is, I think, a huge burden on the families, and really calls for us to acknowledge and recognize the great stress that many are under. At the same time, it also calls on us to build a real partnership. Because without the parents making sure that kids are engaged, that they log on, that they take the learning seriously, we know that many won't. And we're seeing the results right now, that it's not merely a matter of access to the internet and access to a screen, all a first step, but there are many more steps down the path of education. And that requires parental support. And so as you listen to the panel today, I want you to think about the communities you're in, the ways in which you're working with parents of all kinds, including those who may not speak English as their first language, or who may not be working, or who may be under a lot of stress themselves. We need to figure out how to be an ally and a partner with those parents if we really want to make a difference for their children. So I hope that, like me, you'll see this book as a resource, a guide that'll help you during these difficult times. We already heard the term raised by Marcus Newsome that this time's call for adaptive leadership. Adaptive leadership forces us to acknowledge that much of what we do as leaders is not rooted in simply knowing the technical aspects of our job. It's rooted in reflection. It's rooted in ability to learn from our mistakes. It's rooted in humility and a recognition that sometimes we don't have all the answers, but we need to draw upon others, including our staff and our parents, to find solutions to the challenges we face. That's breakthrough leadership. And in the moment, you're going to hear an elaboration on all those points as we hear from those who have been out there doing this work in different fronts, how to make that happen. So congratulations once again, Alan and Marcus, and to Corwin for publishing this book. Thank you from the field. We look forward to learning from you today.
Thank you for being here and for sharing your words.
Yes, thank you, Pedro. Very compelling, and I encourage everyone to think about ways that you can use the book if you are looking for a book study to share with your staff. This is a quote from Pedro in the book's foreword. It says, despite the lofty promises made by reformers, we now have clear evidence that the reforms we have pursued have not led to educational improvement on a large scale. There is an alternative, and it is described in vivid detail in Breakthrough Leadership, everyone. You know that there is a picture icon of the book on the screen. So if you put yourself on gallery view, you will be able to see that. And it is a way for you to order the book now or in the future. And there is a 20% promo code for participants of this webinar. So
Monica?
Yes.
I was just going to say, I know that we can go on for a while, and yet, you know, we've got so many great panelists here who are going to elaborate on.
Yeah.
Yep. So
I'm taking it back. I'm bringing it back to you right now. So without further ado, I want to get into the conversations about what's inside the book. So let's talk about what Pedro said. So Marcus, you were cut off. Alan, you're up. What is it that you do you want to add anything based on what Pedro just said to everyone?
You're talking to me or to Marcus?
Both of you, either of you.
I'm very excited to hear from our panel. I'll come back in later on. I think we've got some amazing practitioners on this call, and some leaders at the national level like Paul Revelle as well. I can't wait to hear, and Nicole Turner. I can't wait to hear what they have to say.
Okay. All right. So Marcus, I'm going to take it directly to the panel. And so let's introduce who's in the room. So starting from my top right, top left, John, you're up. John Malloy, how are you?
I'm doing well, Monica, and I'm John Malloy from the San Ramon Valley Unified School District, formerly the Toronto District School Board, and I'm grateful to be here. This is such an important discussion for us to have with this pandemic and all the connecting challenges that are with it surrounding us. It's possible for us to forget how transformative adaptive leadership, bringing about those equitable outcomes and conditions, is front and center, and it has to be. So I'm grateful to be participating in this panel.
So as we're introducing, I'm going to ask if you might also add something, because you've just left Toronto, one of the largest school boards in North America, second, I believe, and now you're in basking in the sun in California. But the reality is that you've seen, you know, equity from different sides of the coin for a long time. What are you seeing as the opportunity now to advance the equity cause? And what are you seeing as the obstacles now that you're in America to doing so? And how are you kind of dealing with some of those?
So one of the things I can say, being born in the United States, having worked in Canada for quite some time and now being back, is that You know, the human community shares some common elements regardless of where you are. Culture is different, foundational pieces might be different, but I think that I want to focus on the notion that whether it's Canada or whether it's the United States, whether it's Toronto or the San Ramon Valley in California, I think that we are all relating to this pandemic differently. And people's experiences of it, their life being changed or not because of it, the conditions that it's causing are different. And to the extent that we can build empathy and compassion for each other's experiences is step one. Because one of the things I'm finding is that in the stress of these times and the loss of control that it's causing, not all of us are experiencing this in the same way. And if we can't build those conditions where we hear each other's experience, understand each other's voice, and figure out how the actually harming some way more than others, and build some ability to have that discussion, I found that in my Toronto experience, and I also find that opportunity here. We've been talking about trying to transform education for as long as I've been in the profession, which is now about 34 years. The opportunity I'm seeing, even though it's hard, is we can't do things the way we used to. It's impossible to hold on to the structures and processes we used to use. We have some choices we can make around how to move through this door and be different, and keeping an eye on those who've been most underserved forever, front of mind while we're doing that work. So I'll speak more about that, but I'd love to hear what some of my other panelists, colleagues have to say about this.
Yeah, Aaron, you know, in talking about being different and making decisions, in chapter 2 of the book, it jumped out at me that you said the time for asking questions is done, and the time for decision is now. We can't let perfect get in the way of great, right? And so, can you explain more of what you believe the shift of mindset needs to be for school leaders?
Yeah, thank you. Aaron Spence, I'm superintendent in Virginia Beach, Virginia, as you can see on the beautiful southeast coast of our Commonwealth. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today and with friends. You know, that quote in context was about how we're getting through this moment in time, right? So the need to get past what a friend of mine has called the nirvana fallacy, right? Which is this notion that if it's not perfect, we can't do it. And we shouldn't do it. And in this moment in time, I think what really matters is that we remember that children are at the core of our work and that they need us. And that if we fall into sort of this decision paralysis because we're looking for a perfect response to this pandemic, that we will underserve children. And we don't have the luxury of underserving children in our communities. And so for us, the notion has been to, you know, I mean, we've talked a lot in Virginia Beach about, and I think my colleagues would agree, superintendents across the country would certainly agree, that what we faced this summer was a series of bad decisions, right? So there wasn't going to be a good decision. So it was just, how do you make the best bad decision? And, you know, in a sense of, you weren't going to make everybody happy no matter what you did, right? And that we didn't have all of the information that we needed to make many of the decisions that we had to make to get schools open. And so when you're in that moment, what do? You put your core values at the front, and you make the best decisions you can make built on those core values. And if your core values rest on serving children, putting children first, and meaning that in terms of all children, then you can make decisions that will allow you to get your schools open, that will allow you to serve children in your community that need you, and that will allow you to also capture and leverage the very best of what you know you can do, and then be reflective about what else you need to continue to do in this moment. So that, I hope, gives a little context for that quote.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm listening to what you're saying. You know, there was no great decision that someone can make. And Paul, that reminds me of something that I read that you said in the book around the oversimplification of systemic issues, right? The educational system is always looked to and expected to solve the issues of society. And the pandemic is no exception of that. So there's a pandemic, people can't go outside, but you know what? We need to open up, and schools, you need to open. And so could you talk a little bit to us about your thoughts around these systemic issues of these big problems that sometimes we try to oversimplify?
Sure. Thank you, Monica. I think I'm up now. Congratulations to Alan and Marcus on the book, and my hat is off to all of you in the field who are doing the work on the front line where I am not. I'm a former teacher and principal, so I know the feeling, and I'm a coach and advisor to a lot of school leaders and policymakers right now. And I see this as a particularly opportune moment. We have a time, and this is piggybacking a little bit on something Alan said earlier. I've likened it to a kind of a tidal wave that pulls the ocean floor back up, pulls the water back up off the ocean floor, and has revealed to many in society who were sort of blissfully unaware of glaring, deep, persistent inequities that constitute the permanent lives of families living there. And suddenly there is a sense of urgency about doing something about these things. Too often the notion is, let's have schools do everything. Part of the reason about the sense of urgency is when schools closed, people said, well, what's going to happen? Children don't have enough food. And happily, our school systems responded to that. What about their mental health? What about their physical health? What about housing stability and things of this nature? As though school were a multi-purpose agency fully capacitated to take care of all these kinds of issues. But at best, those of us in education have struggled over time because we're compassionate, we know these things matter, to do something, often just putting a Band-Aid on some of the conditions that get in the way of our young people coming to school actually ready to learn. So I think in this moment, we have a chance to have a conversation in society about what's the true and fitting role for schools and the degree to which the rest of the community needs to become engaged in this business of not just educating our children, but looking after their well-being. And I think we have an opportunity in this moment to pioneer some of the practices in terms of personalization and family engagement and sort of deeper learning and engineering our schools to build relationships and using technology in a way that meets every child where they are and gives them what they need. We have an opportunity, and it's all going to be in the end about adaptive leadership. And that's why this book is so important. But what I see in leaders who are successful in this moment is the capacity to strike a vision and set some priorities. You know, we've had a bit like an earthquake in our field, and people are coming out from under the rubble, standing up, dusting themselves off, making sure they can breathe and take a drink and communicate with people next to them. They aren't ready yet to engage in full-scale transformation because they're like a traumatized patient, like a heart attack patient on the gurney in the hospital. You can't talk about changing your lifestyle until you get up and going again. So leaders will have to find the right timing to introduce to their constituents and get them engaged in transforming education. But an opportunity for transformation is exactly what we have now, and I hope we can take advantage of it.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much for that, Paul. And you mentioned three things. You mentioned, you know, getting the environment right for students, technology, the use of technology, family and community engagement. And that makes me think about the three people that we have left on the panel. I'm going to go to Susan first. I know that you worked in your district to ensure that the people standing in front of your students look like your students, and that you made a concerted effort to ensure that you partnered with HBCU, Virginia State University, in your, was that you, Susan?
Nope.
Who did that work?
I think that was Marcus.
Yeah.
Was that Marcus? Oh, Marcus. Look at Marcus. You did that work, right? And so getting the district ready and getting the schools right for the students, what did that kind of work look like to make sure that your students were ready to learn and made sure that they had people in front of them that who who they could relate to?
Well, Monica, I am prepared to respond to that, but I would rather hear from the other three panelists and then chime in.
Okay, all right. So Susan, what do you think about family and community engagement and what needs to happen in the districts to bring in and develop some level of trust from families?
Well, I think one of the opportunities that has arisen over the past several months as we've all adjusted to this new way of living and working is the very symbiotic relationship between school staff and families. Our teachers and principals and counselors realize like never before how much they need families as partners to ensure children succeed. And I think our families now realize too how much they need the partnership of teachers, counselors, principals, et cetera, to make sure that their children have what they need. So what we're seeing is a more organic and less formalized kind of engagement more ongoing between families and home, or families and school. And I think that's very healthy. We capitalized on that when we started the school year this year by having what we called family connection days. And there were 3 days set aside for teachers to make personal contact with each of their students and talk with the families and just get to know the family and what their hopes were for their child, which were very, very powerful. And then we also are following that up throughout the year by making sure that every one of our 18,000 students has a meaningful adult connection from their school who's checking in with them weekly and either building or maintaining a relationship that already exists, because our promise in Highline is to know every student by name, strength, and need, and that's never been more important or more challenging. And we can't leave it to chance that every child has a connection, because those of us who have worked in schools, I'm a former high school teacher, know it just takes one. It takes one meaningful relationship between an adult and a child in a school to keep that child engaged and put them on a path to success. The only other thing that I do want to say in response to John and a little bit of Aaron as well, you know, I think this shift in how families and schools interact with one another is a positive one. I think we are all seeing lots of opportunities that can come from this, and parts of our traditional education system that we've long wanted to change and haven't. Whether it was because we didn't have the political courage, the social capital, the time, the money, whatever it is. And I think there's this widespread belief that we are going to come out of this profoundly different than how we entered. I want to caution us not to take that as a given. The muscle memory of a bureaucracy is tough, and it's built to last. It took us a long time to make our public school system what it is, and it's going to take a long time to make it something different. And so I do not take for granted or take it as a given that we will come out of this with a transformed system that is what our children need and deserve. We're going to have to fight for it, folks. We're going to have to fight for it the way we've been fighting for equity for years now, because if we think that equity was a fight before now, just wait. Just wait, because we have children who are falling so behind during this pandemic. What we are going to have to invest in to help them heal and thrive from this is going to be significant. And that's going to require some national conversation and a level of candor and bringing everyone to the table. And everyone's going to have to be at the table for us to realize this utopian vision that I think we're all talking about when it comes to public ed that will not come about easily.
Yeah, it is going to be tough. And I know it's tough in Massachusetts as well. And you've been hit hard. So what's happening, and what do you think about the family engagement work that needs to happen to make the educational environment for students and families more trusting in your area, Sharon?
So as the Chief Officer of Student Support Services in Brockton, this is the work that I have been doing from the moment we shut down, and that is how do we connect with families? How do we ensure families have the supports that they need and the voice that they need, because ultimately what we tend to do is give people what we think they need rather than ask them and find out from them what it is that they do need. And so we went right into, that crisis management mode that most districts went into. How do we make sure they're fed? The kids have food, the families have access to the things that they need. And we were realistic. We were not a one-to-one device district. And so how do we get at least one computer in the household? And so we went through that. And over the summer, this district has really put forth the effort to focus on the social emotional needs of students and families and the educators in this district. And so part of that work also included bringing in the voices of families. And one of the things we heard over and over was, that's great that you're now giving us all of this, but you're expecting parents to be experts in technology so that they can properly support their children at home. And so in response to that, it was, now we have to make them users of the technology as well, because as much as we want to believe that children can just log on, when something doesn't go well, they're going to turn to the parent or whoever's in the household and say, okay, I'm struggling, how do you help me? And they were letting us know, we don't know how to help them. We might be experts in our own fields, but we weren't trained educators. We weren't trained in technology in this way. And so you have to do more for us. And so we started doing trainings on our learning management system with the parents. And we are a very diverse community, so we do everything in multiple languages, day and night, so that if we have people working during the day, they can come in the evening and vice versa. And we had community partners who joined with us and became what they called super users of the technology. So the parents didn't just have to reach out to the school, they could reach out to somebody within their own community or organization and get that level of support as well. And so for us, that engagement piece, it really has become a community effort to support students and families. We have community mentors that work directly with the schools. They're knocking on doors. If we're not hearing from children, if we're not seeing them on a regular basis, we have mentors going to the homes to check in with families and make sure everything is okay and reconnect them to the school or to a resource that they need. So for us, and Brockton was second highest in COVID cases in the state for a while. And so we have been significantly impacted by COVID. And then we were significantly impacted by the civil unrest in the country, because our community took to the streets of Brockton to protest. And so we are dealing with two pandemics. We really are. And so that process means we have to open our doors, our thoughts, our training for educators. It requires that we do a lot, because like Susan said, this is not going to just be, when we can get back in front of each other again, that everything will be different. We are seeing a lot of people who have fears, and those fears play out in ways that are not best for kids. And we have to work on training. We've done enough.
So I think Sharon is frozen for me. Is she frozen for the rest of you? Yes. But I was going to take what Sharon said and bring it to you, Nicole. Parents are saying, families are saying what they need, what they would need to ensure that their children are still engaged in learning at home. But the technology is just not there. The resources are just not there. What are some of the things that school leaders and teachers and other folks can do around in making sure that families stay alert and have the resources that they need in terms of technology and internet?
No, thank you for having me, and congratulations on the book. I'm so excited. Alan in particular has become my new best friend. He has my cell phone number, so he knows how to reach me. And I'm excited because as a person who's also in the midst of writing a book, he gives me a lot of energy and hope. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Let me actually, if you don't mind, before I get into the conversation around, how do we navigate through this new normal? If you all don't mind for a second, I'm a researcher. I work at Brookings. I study and I explore how this ecosystem looks prior to the pandemic and now. And my particular focus is on the digital divide. And we knew going into this pandemic that there were 18 million people across the country that were disconnected. They were people of color, they were low income, they were people who were foreign born, they were rural residents, and they were older Americans. This pandemic, and I think Monica said it well, in terms of the conditions that it's placed on families, and not just conditions, but the stresses. I have a 13-year-old daughter that just the other day was sitting on the floor, just zoomed out because of the fact that this is what this new learning looks like. And I would suggest to all of you, as we've gone into this pandemic, we're now sort of in this national pilot of what does it mean, and I'm going to add some other R's before I go to the breakthrough part of what I think is so special about this book. But what does it mean to reimagine a much more resilient educational system that allows for this type of agility right now? I mean, we've had to do things differently, and I think someone also said that. And this reimagining of education, as I've spoken to educators and administrators and parents across the country for the last 7 months, it's really suggesting to me that we're taking this time to learn, but I think the leadership has really been the commanding factor across the country as to which administrators and leaders are able to pull their head up at night and keep going. It's like Alan and I were talking just recently about just the variety of Post-it notes that have been placed on the walls of schools trying to figure out, do I, find a way to bring a Wi-Fi hotspot in an already constrained budget? How do I work with the community? What is the role of the state? Am I still waiting on federal money? And I think at the end of the day, I want to just point out 2 points, Monica, as I answer your question. Whatever we decide to do, it's going to have 2 impacts. And I think this is the point of the book. As leaders, it will impact our in-school experiences. So what we're going through now, this rush to get kids back into a facility, into traditional learning, in some cases, this is not working. If you're in rural Alabama, I had a podcast the other day with the superintendent of the state of Alabama, school superintendent, who essentially said, most of my districts are working, and I've got to suggest, and he said this very clearly in this podcast, that my Black and Latina families want to go virtual, but they can't. And in spite of the fact they want to go virtual because they're more susceptible to the disease, but they can't because they don't have the resources because of what poverty has done. So with that being said, we have to recognize that schooling may not take place within the facilities of the beautiful, endowed, and endeared hallways that we've created, that we may have to be creative in terms of where we actually send students. I just wrote a piece just recently about looking at unused office spaces and figuring out partnerships with churches and transforming these awful digital parking lots that have families cooped up in their cars into digital parks so that our kids can go outside, particularly our public school students and our students who are most vulnerable. That to me is sort of the resiliency of leadership, to think outside of the box when it comes to how do we recreate the in-school experience for students and parents. But then I think this implication, and Sharon sort of mentioned it, and many of you mentioned it, when it comes to out of school. There's a statistic from the McKinsey Corporation that says that if African-American kids and Latina kids and low-income kids do not get back into some type of connection to learning, that they will be behind. Black kids, if they don't get into some type of formal connection to learning within the next few months, will be 10.3 months behind in cognitive retention. Low-income kids, more like a year. So what started as a digital access gap, which has become an educational achievement gap, will eventually become an opportunity gap. And so all of you that are on this call have to start asking ourselves, what is the consequence of the type of leadership that you're exerting, which is, I think, the frame of the book, that is actually going to help stave off some of those consequences. Think about the investments that schools have made in the diversity of teachers. Think about the investments that schools have made in the discipline models that we're now using that don't over-criminalize or over-target students of color. Do you know that there was a kid in Michigan just in July that was arrested, 15-year-old girl who was arrested for not logging on to her courses, and jailed, by the way. And she was a Black girl. by the way, who we worked hard to actually take away that stigma of discipline when it comes to children of color. I can go on and on and on about these consequences, but as a parent, as a sociologist, I'm worried. And I think that leads to the final point of what Monica, and I'm sorry, I'm like a preacher. You put me around,
I hear you.
Listen, I'm going to talk, right? But I think that goes to this point of what you asked. So what do you do? I think the most important thing is, as a breakthrough leader, I was so shocked when many educators came to me and said, okay, I've got to go and I've got to go build a network and I got to figure out what a mesh is. And then I got to go figure out what the technical specifications. That is not what educators have been trained to do. Right. And so I think the most important thing is to start to think about, how do you exercise resiliency through this? What lessons do you take out of this? How do you listen to your parents? Really trick question. How do you start by getting the data from your parents about their household broadband at the enrollment of school years versus during a pandemic? Most people don't even know what broadband existed in the households of their students. How do you, once you have that information, keep checking in with your parents? How do you engage your PTA? I'm actually the vice chair of my daughter's PTA. I didn't think I was going to be the vice chair during a virtual meeting we had yesterday, which was kind of clanky. But what we realized from these parents is they need more help. So how do you utilize your parent organizations, your local churches to fill in, Monica, some of those gaps? Can your local church help you with after-school programming? In Dallas, the T.D. Jakes Foundation underwrote a STEM program, which they now intend to take to an after-school moment. What they said is, because of the will of the principal and the administrator of the Dallas Public Schools and partners in the community, they'll be able to take that further to sort of break some of the boredom that kids are experiencing when they get offline. I end this by saying, we in this country have not solved the digital divide, and it has been decades. We do not expect 7 months to solve the digital divide. But what we do expect during this time, and I think this leadership plays a huge role in the type of charisma, the type of forward-thinking foresight, is that schools need to realize, and I'll end here, and it may be controversial to some, that technology has left the station and we have no choice anymore but to embrace it, not just in how we cope in times like this, but how we integrate that into the pedagogy of what we need our students to learn and understand going forward. If we don't embrace that fact and we still try to go back to old norms and paradigms like Alan and I talk about, what's gonna happen is something else is gonna hit and we're gonna find ourselves going through the same conversation again. So again, I cannot say it enough. Commissioner Rosa also was on the same podcast and she used this term that I hope to write about. Somehow with Alan in the op-ed, Marcus, no child left offline.
All right.
I have a question. Can I jump in, Monica?
Sure.
All right, great. It's for not for you necessarily, Nicole, but you know, the issue of how do we build the relational trust with the families that we have ignored for so long? Yeah. I really think that that's kind of critical if we're going to solve, and not only the families, but these organizations that we didn't even know existed. Like, you know, one of the people in the book talked about using Burger King and the manager there as a hotspot. So we have all these new relationships with the fire department, with the sheriff's department, with whoever, and they could be leveraged. But I'm just really getting back to the underlying issue of, in this context in which we're all finding ourselves, trust is a big issue for that. And how do we build trust with the families that we have put off almost systematically for so long and so effectively? And how do we build and leverage and grow the kinds of partnerships that are necessary to bring the resources into the schools, as Marcus Newsome has so effectively done in his tenure, but is unable to describe right now online because we've lost him. So I ask the rest of you, I know, Paul, you've done it, you know, in multiple cities. John, you know, you've described a process in the past. I'd be interested, I know, Susan, you're doing it across multiple divides. Sharon, you're doing it, you know, where you can't even communicate with families. Can you give some examples of what others can do? Aaron, I didn't mean to leave you out, but you've got plenty to add too.
Well, Ellen, I'll jump in because I want to pick up on something that you've just asked. Susan, you mentioned it. Nicole, you mentioned it in a different way as well. And that is, this bureaucracy, as you said, Susan, doesn't want to move. But the truth is, we don't have a choice. The
Right.
trouble is, will we just swing back whenever we do have a choice again? So how do we create those conditions? And to Nicole's point, I mean, technology may not be the driver, but the world of technology opens up all kinds of doors, whether we're in this place or not. So the trouble when you talk about trust, and most of my graduate work has been in the area of trust, actually not so hard from my perspective. The implementation is ridiculous if we're a bureaucracy that doesn't want to change. Concept of trust that I'm pulling on is you listen real closely, you create the conditions for everyone's experience and their perspective to not only matter, but to actually get in and help us realize we're not where we need to be. And then we act on it. Trust isn't just about listening, trust isn't just about words, it's actually seeing actions that explicitly connect to what other experiences are telling us. And this is where I think we have an adaptive breakthrough leadership opportunity. I've just come about this in the last couple of weeks again, when people were throwing everything at the district office related to, and what are we going to do about this? And what are we going to do about that? And we're running around with our heads cut off, trying to figure out 1,000 things to do just to keep the lights on certain days in this remote world that we're in. And I said, wait a second. These are adaptive problems because there's no good answers. We're listening to what the needs are. We don't automatically know what to do about it. It's coming at the district office, and we do have a role to play in terms of creating the conditions, but how do we get people into rooms to figure out what does it need to be when the answer is not there? How do we allow the voices of those who are most often not at the center to drive the work of those adaptive breakthrough conversations? So I'm starting to think about then trust can grow because we're actually doing something in relationship to what we're hearing. The challenge is, for those who may have the voices that are always on our plates or on our table and aren't able to get exactly what they need when they want it. That's a whole nother dynamic that we're simply wrestling with. I'm not suggesting that everyone doesn't have good issues to put on our tables. That's not what I'm saying, but it's just adding another dimension. So as I listen to you and some of the other panelists, it's about listening where we don't always listen. It's about change where we, frankly, aren't all that great at changing. It's about bringing people around the table to do the action, including the people whose experience it is that we're listening to, and actually not only come up with something new, but actually start to implement that something new and hold on to it when the bureaucracy wants to pull it right back to, and I'm taking Susan's words, where we've always done it. Because that is the constant pull. So just a couple thoughts from me on that.
Alan, I jump in at another point of entry. I think what brings schools and families together is the child. And it's building a relationship of trust around mutual care for the child that I think can make all the difference. You know, we've taken, as others have said, family engagement has been sort of a nice to do, secondary, tertiary thing, and suddenly it has moved to the center and we have no choice but to do it. And the common work there, and it's through joint work that we build trust, is engaging with the children and changing. I mean, here's the major part of it. If you step back, it's shifting the paradigm within schools. We know that one size fits all doesn't work. The factory model is breaking down. This is kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back on treating everybody as average and batch processing, factory producing education. So now we have to see each child individually and customize to them the way we do in medicine, the way business does, and personalizing its approach to people. And in doing that, I think we have the avenue, we have the gateway to building that trust with families, because every family cares about the well-being and success of their child. And if they run into an educator who makes it his or her business to be an advocate for that child, to be a navigator, to develop a success plan for that child, then I think we've got common work that through time builds trust.
Yeah, just to layer on quickly, and so that's not an either or proposition, right? And so the individual work that happens with children, and then the divisional work or the district level work that has to happen to reestablish trust with whole communities. Both of those things have to happen simultaneously. And so just maybe from a practical standpoint, one of the things that I think is really important for school districts to do is to really assess their community engagement efforts and their family engagement efforts, and look at them with a lens of purpose and intent, right? And so if the purpose and intent of our engagement is to, as was kind of alluded to earlier, check a box, we did it. We offered a parent night, we offered a math curriculum night. That isn't going to solve this problem of trust, this question of trust. If the purpose is to establish a relationship, and as John was saying, to really listen to folks about what their needs are, and that can be specific to their individual child, or that can be specific to our community, and then as was stated, to really act on that. So to hear it, to internalize it, believe it, and then demonstrate care for that listening by acting on it. There, I think we have the opportunity to establish it, because actions establish trust. You told me something, I acted on it, now I believe you. And to do that in ways that address the incredible, to bring it back to the kind of original questions, the incredible inequities that pre-existed this pandemic, but that have certainly been highlighted in many ways. And I just want to, because I have to, because it's a soapbox issue for me about technology in our schools, say this. It's amazing to me, remarkable to me, that our communities have turned to our school systems and said, what are you doing about Wi-Fi access for your students? What are you doing about broadband for your students? This is the electricity issue of our day. In the 40s, somebody said, hey, I think everybody needs electricity. It should be a public utility and everybody should have access to it. And they went out and they did it. And in 2020, it's absolutely insane to me that we haven't had that conversation at the federal level, and even more insane that we think it's the school district's jobs to solve it. That is a serious national equity issue. But we haven't turned from that task, and all of us, every one of us has stories to tell about how we're addressing that equity challenge. But again, we have to unite together and talk about where do these real equity challenges also live, because as other folks were saying, not everything can be laid at the feet of an institution that's trying to deal with individual children in really real and specific ways. So I'll get off that soapbox, but.
May I jump in real quickly? May I jump into, just to respond real quickly to what Aaron said. I mean, I think across the country, everyone is wondering the same thing that Aaron is talking about in terms of where did we drop the ball in the United States when it came to making broadband an imperative for communities? And, honestly, for those who don't know, we dropped the ball because broadband in this country is primarily financed through private sector investment. And because it's financed through private sector investment, it's often led by return on investment in terms of where we build. Does not make that an excuse, but what it suggests, and what I actually love about this time where digital access has commonly been 7th or 10th on the list of challenges, by raising the profile, it brings this to a more hands-on deck strategy. And I think the power of influence right now to figure out ways that we make this much more of a ubiquitous problem is actually going to be interesting going forward. Not taking away from Alan's book, but I'm writing a book on just the US digital divide. And you would be surprised by the lack of connection that exists within school neighborhoods, not just districts, but just down the street from a school. And so, as it was suggested, part of what we're seeing, which makes this so scary with the introduction of digital, is that we are seeing the remaking of Brown versus Board of Education if we do not get public school students the same type of access. And in some cases, we're seeing teachers sitting in some of those same parking lots, getting online to do their instruction, and we forgot about them. And so I would just say to all of us, as you think about this, I cannot impress upon this community enough. It's an access issue. It's also an issue, and I think John kind of said it, how do we leverage the technology to do services differently? How many children are sitting at home because we haven't figured out our school situation, but they're in abusive households where school was a safe space to escape that? How many kids who are experiencing broadband insecurity are also experiencing food and healthcare insecurities? My friends, the emperor has no clothes right now. And I think these conversations require just what the book is indicating, which is a type of leadership that builds resilient systems that become sort of where we sort of look at ourselves, where our systemic inequalities sort of mirror the type of digital disparities that schools are experiencing firsthand. So again, I just think that this conversation is so helpful, and I'm looking at the folks, Monica, on here, because you all are the heroes. And that's what's most important. That's never said in terms of the educational community.
Well, Nicole, I think you've been walking around my house or have an ear in my house, because I've been saying the emperor has no clothes so often that my grandson said, "Where did you get that from? I want to read that book. What is that book?" And because I keep saying the emperor has no clothes every time something happens. Marcus, I know that you've had some internet, some connectivity issues going on and off. And I want to make sure that you have that you jump in and you have something to say. It's 5 p.m. everyone. I know we're supposed to wrap it up, but I just want you to hang in there. Marcus, can we hear from you?
Yeah, thank you, Monica. I'm experiencing the internet connectivity issues that you've all been discussing.
Modeling for us.
In real time. Yes, it's been very frustrating, and I know how our students feel when they're off and on. But I'd like to close, and Monica, if I drop off, just hearing that Alan and I, really, there was a precursor to the catalyst for this book, and it was all about equity. And it was about a role that I accepted as superintendent in one of the most challenged school systems in the country. And I had a short video clip that I was going to show, but time will not permit that. But I encourage you to go see the trailer. You can get it off of YouTube. It's called Petersburg Rising. And Alan was the executive producer of this work. And it tells the story of many urban communities across America where inequity is so prevalent. When we look at all the indicators of a healthy community, this community had the lowest statistics in the state when it came to juvenile arrests, mortality, teen pregnancy, literacy rates. It was all there. And then, so that was a reflection on the schools. I actually produced this documentary that tells this amazing story and how we brought people from the governor's office down to the single parent to transform the school system and to address many of the issues that schools are experiencing across the Commonwealth. And so I hope that you'll all join us for webinar 3, and I hope to have an opportunity to at least spend a few moments sharing that work. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you. People are hanging in there. Susan, would you like to say anything before I pivot over to Alan? Do you have anything to add? Sharon?
I just wanted to add a couple of things. One being that with families being able to watch classes, when we talk about building relationships, parents are seeing teachers, seeing how they're teaching kids. That's a good place to start really building some of those relationships. I agree with Nicole, some of the kids who need to be in school because that was their safe place, figuring out how to make sure they have a safe place. It is vital to this work. And the technology issues, some of us have experienced a little bit of it. Even when we have good access, it doesn't mean we have perfect access. And right. So for the kids who struggle the most, imagine they get in and then they're right back out. And so there's so much to this work. In so many ways, we have to continue to connect with families and especially with students and do our best to ensure that academic achievement gap doesn't just keep getting wider and wider and wider.
Mm-hmm. And so, Alan, I'm going to take it to you to wrap it up. And I want to thank everyone for joining, but don't sign off yet, Alan.
Thank you all for being here. We have an extraordinary panel. I wish we could spend 2 days together talking. And you've got more than that to share, obviously. Well, this again, thank you for all of the leaders in the field who are doing the kind of work that you're doing. It's really heartfelt. It's making a difference. It's a struggle, and I think it's more of a struggle now than ever. So that means we have to just dig deeper, and we have to fortify one another, because otherwise, you know, it's easy to lose hope. And obviously, we're the leaders that we had hoped we'd find elsewhere. And now here we are. So let's look at one another here in your schools and your districts, around the families that you once maybe didn't even know, and you'll find leaders, you'll find hope. And I hope that we can pull it together one by one, but also systemically, so that we can maximize this crisis as an opportunity. And that's what we need to do, ultimately, despite the odds. So thank you for your courage in this. Thank you for being a part of all of this.
Well, I want to thank all the panelists for joining us, and I want to thank you, Alan and Marcus, for being brave and vigilant and bringing this book to everyone, especially in these times. It's very difficult to stay focused and challenging, but you did it, and we're all the better for it. And thank you, Corwin, for backing such an important project to getting this out to everyone. You see on your screen that Linda Darling-Hammond will be a part of the third series of this discussion on Monday, November 2nd. So please register to go to Corwin, www.corwin.com, and register. Go into the event section and register for the November 2nd session. And thank you everyone so much for all of your contributions and the discussion today. Amen. Yes, you all said such profound things. I just want to thank everyone for their contributions today. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.